Greetings, comrades, and welcome back to another ComradeCast. I know it's been quite some time. Unfortunately, it's been quite a hectic month, quite a hectic December, and not just because of all of the holidays and whatnot, and happy holidays, Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, all the rest of it. I don't give a crap what you celebrate. I hope you had a good time with your family. And as you can see, I've got a little bit of a different setup here. I had basically a music stand. Now I got this hanging thing. I don't know if I'm going to keep it in the frame and everything like that, but like I said, I'm setting things up a little bit different down here. So not only is this going to be a recording studio for me, as it has been, I'm also changing this into a more professional office workspace. So I'm doing a little bit of rearranging, getting a little bit of gear, and hopefully once it's all set up, it's going to look awesome. But in the meantime, I'm still figuring out lighting and stuff like that. So bear with me while I figure this all out. And by the next time we do one of these, it'll be nailed down pat. Let me spend a little bit of time here talking about, we'll move to the fancy tree because it's a little bit more serene for me to look at. But let me move into what's been going on. So the main thing is I have been incredibly sick. As usual, I've mentioned that at this time of year, especially at this time of year, my kids will bring home any manner of illnesses from daycare, and they will spread throughout the family. And what happened is that I got sick first early on in December, and then everything was going good. And as you might be able to tell, I'm still messed up here. I'm still congested and sniffling and coughing and all that lovely, lovely stuff. Unfortunately for me, what happened is that just as I was starting to get better, as my wife got sick, and she got sick really, really hard to the point where she was incapacitated for a couple days. I got a little bit of a taste of what it was like to be a single parent, and it was not a lot of fun. I'll tell you that much. It was not a lot of fun at all, and it was just like survival mode, but we're getting through it. She's still not 100% by any stretch of the imagination, but she's getting better. We're getting better. But moving on to, well, I guess we had some good and bad things happen over December that we didn't even get to talk about, right? We had Assad being overthrown in a spectacular fashion. And we still have a little bit of an actual ceasefire settling in the region. Like many people, do not think that this is going to last very long. There's going to be something that eventually ends up breaking the kind of stalemate that we have. Not sure what that is going to be, but yeah, I don't expect Syria to stay quiet for an extended period of time. And then after that, we had a really bizarre series of events go on in South Korea where the president tried to declare martial law, failed, got overturned, and then it seemed like he was going to hang on for a little bit, and then enough of his party abandoned him to the point where now it looks like he is going to be impeached and arrested, and things aren't looking good for the old Yoon goons over in South Korea. And then, of course, we had Luigi Mangione bust onto the scene and become an American folk hero in a very short period of time. As you may not be surprised to know, I am a pro-Luigi fellow. I think that it gets to the point where, especially being Canadian, it is very difficult for me to fathom what the American healthcare system is like. And while I haven't had any kind of personal firsthand experience with it, most of you guys know I'm married to an American woman, and she has had much more experience with the American healthcare system than I have. And for her to come here to this country and see what the difference is. Let's just say she's been a big convert from the public healthcare system over to the private healthcare system. It's just one of those fights that at this point, most conservatives in the United States have stopped fighting. Even here, right in Alberta, we have, I think, probably one of the best healthcare systems in the country. In case you guys don't know, in Canada, healthcare is different based on the province. Healthcare is one of the provincial jurisdictions. So while they get money, a lot of funding from the federal government, how they actually use that funding and the systems they come up with is different on a provincial level. And by and large, the provinces over on the western part of the country tend to have healthcare figured out a bit better than the eastern part of the country. Every time you read some Canadian horror story, especially like the Atlantic provinces, they seem to have a really rough time of it. Every time you read some horror story from a Canadian healthcare mess up, it's always from Nova Scotia or New Brunswick or Newfoundland. It's always like one of those three. Sometimes it's Quebec, and then sometimes it can also be Ontario. Here, Ontario is also not the best in terms of their healthcare system and how it's managed. But growing up in BC and now living in Alberta, I've experienced both provinces' healthcares, and I've never had any bad experience at all. Nothing even close to it. I've had to use the healthcare system quite recently because of being sick, and it's always generally a pretty good experience. Unfortunately, I will say it has gotten worse over time. When I moved here to Alberta in 2015, it was a lot easier to find a family physician. It's getting significantly harder. But that being said, it's still pretty damn good. One of the things that we have here, and I'm curious if this is like just an Alberta thing or if other places have this we have a number you can call. Instead of 911, you call 811. And from there, you can do a number of things. You can ask them to help you find a doctor. But the thing that I end up doing a lot, and I end up doing this a lot, particularly with my kids, is I'll phone 811 and be like, oh, my kid has these symptoms. Should I be worried? How can I mitigate them? And one of the things they've been really helpful is like helping me calm down and be like, okay, this is not that big an issue. Just make sure they're drinking their water, make sure they're taking their medicine, and they should recover fairly quickly. Or they'll also tell you this is a serious issue and you need to go to the hospital right away. So yeah, I've always wondered, is this just an Alberta thing? I'm pretty sure this wasn't in BC. At least I never used it when I lived in BC. So I'm curious if this is available in other places. But another thing I will show you guys here in real time. This is the estimated emergency wait times in various hospitals throughout the Edmonton region. And some of them are pretty bad, especially the small town ones. Devon is a small town southwest of here. They got 6 hours, 7 minutes. Fort Saskatchewan, a small town northeast of here, almost 8 hours. And then there's a couple other here. Grey Nuns is in southern Edmonton, 3 hours. Leduc is another small town, 4 hours. Misericordia is on the west end. That's 5.5 hours. But you guys get the picture here. Some of these are better than others. The one I'll tell you that I end up going to if I need to go to the hospital, and if I do need to go to the hospital, this is absolutely what I'm doing, is I'm looking on here and picking the hospital with the shortest wait time. But the one I will always go to is the Sturgeon. That's the one in St. Albert. It is the nicest one in the region. That's where I'd go. If I had to go to the hospital right now, go to them. And this is actually pretty accurate because I have gone to hospitals based on this wait time, and it's usually within the ballpark. Usually it's exactly what they say, plus minus 15 minutes. And maybe I should have picked a better day to do this because some of these are a lot longer. Usually it's when I check it out. It's usually, I would say the average wait time is about 3 hours. Then again, we are recording just after New Year's. It's January 2nd. But the point here is that at least with this, you have the information. You can get the information you need. If you need to go to a hospital, you can figure out exactly which one you need to go to. You can decide based on the wait time and how far you are away from them. So instead of going, for example, you went to the Royal Alexandria Hospital. This one's right in the middle of downtown Edmonton. You said, no, I'm not going there. Instead, I'm going to go to the Grey Nuns, which is in southern Edmonton. You save yourself 2 hours of wait time, which is pretty substantial, more like 2.5 hours. So now to continue our conversation about healthcare, I've moved us outside. We're outside in front of the emergency room at the Sturgeon Hospital in St. Albert. Like I said, this is the one I go to if the wait times are down. This is the one I usually choose, even if it's further away from me to drive than other hospitals. But the point is that I want to spend a little bit of time. I want to talk about a personal story when it comes to healthcare and myself and my wife and the differences between Canadian and American healthcare systems. The pregnancy for our first child was rough, to say the least. It was very hard on my wife. And unfortunately, she had to be born a little bit prematurely. So she had to spend a little bit of time in the NICU before she could come home. And obviously, this is an extremely stressful time in any parent's life, not just being this is our first time having a kid. This kid needs medical attention, and we have to manage that on top of being first-time parents. And it was an incredibly stressful time, as I'm sure you guys can imagine. But when that stressful time was over and we were discharged, we just walked out of that hospital and went straight home and got to focus on taking care of our child and just taking care of our child. And there was a time when my wife and I first got together and we were deciding, am I going to come down to the States or are you going to come up here to Canada? And I think we made the right decision because I can't imagine going through the stress that we went through in that circumstance, and then having to add on top of that the stress of having to deal with the American healthcare system, wondering if I'm going to be out of pocket. Is this going to be covered by my insurance? And even if it is, you still have to pay a deductible. You still have to pay certain things out of pocket. And having to worry about that financial pressure is like every day we spend here is potentially more money that we're adding to our debt when we get out. I remember reading, it was like a story on Reddit where this guy was like obviously an American healthcare system. He was talking about how his wife was pregnant, and he basically had this, he's like talking about, man, this is what people have to do. This is a great idea. You have to reserve your room in advance, and you have to pay $5,000 up front basically with them to reserve like your birthing room and your birthing. And this will help save in insurance and other costs down the road, and you won't have to worry about all these things. Wow. On top of all of the added expenses having a kid has, now you're going to throw in like an extra $5,000 just to make sure that you can actually stay at a hospital. It's insanity. And people wonder why people aren't having kids anymore. They blame shit like it's the culture, or they blame wokeness. But no, it's not wokeness. It's brokenness. People don't have the money to afford kids, and people don't want to bring up a kid in a system where they are struggling to survive themselves, and then of course condemn their child to it. So the point I'm leading up to here is that it's not at all shocking to me that people are praising Luigi Mangione. It is clear beyond all reasonable doubt, beyond all objective metrics, that the healthcare providers and the healthcare insurance providers in the United States do absolutely nothing to benefit the people. In fact, the higher their profits, the more pain they have inflicted, because they have a perverse incentive not to do the job that you hired them for. It's total insanity. And I always remember back in, and most of you guys probably remember Dan Carlin and his series of Hardcore History and Common Sense. I should check up on old Dan. It's been a little while. But anyway, he did an episode called Logical Insanity, and this was about the Allied bombings in World War II and how that this was, yes, of course, this is an insane thing to be doing and is objectively a war crime, bombing civilians, but it was the logical answer to the insane situation that was World War II. And what Luigi Mangione is showing us is logical insanity, because the people can see that the system is so broken and so unjust that even the most morally upstanding of us will cheer violence in order to correct it. So yeah, there you go. That's my thought on Luigi Mangione and the American healthcare system, and why I am thankful that I didn't have to experience the horrors of it. So for this episode, I don't really have too much of a topic. It's more of a riff and what's going to happen, where I see 2025 going, talk a little bit about what the future will bring. And we'll start with, of course, the big boy on the block, the United States, and the election of Donald Trump. And one thing that has been fascinating to me and a little bit depressing is seeing the weird kind of reversal that is happening with a lot of people who were very on the Trump resistance train in his first term. And now we're seeing them like reverse to be like, oh, maybe Trump's not so bad. He's not the worst guy in the world. And basically doing an entire 180 on the rhetoric that they have been talking about for years. And it's so pathetic to watch. One of the worst offenders has been the Young Turks. Basically, were all on the resistance train in the first Trump term. And then when it comes to the second Trump term, now they're on the train. And I think one of the big issues with the way that people on the left combated Donald Trump in his first term is they fought him on literally everything. Everything he could possibly do and everything he possibly did was worth resisting and worth fighting and worth standing up against. And that is a poor strategy, because you got to pick your battles. You really do have to pick your battles, especially in politics. I think picking your battles is a very important skill to master and to manage. And if you are just fighting everything always, not only you're going to completely exhaust yourself and exhaust your own personal resources, people will just see you as nothing but contrarians, right? That there has to be a point where even a broken clock is right twice a day type of thing, that no matter how bad Donald Trump is, you can't disagree with him on literally everything that he does. It's important to manage our time and our energy fighting the right fights. And one of the issues, especially for the neoliberal types against Donald Trump, is that the nerve that he hit with a lot of people in the Rust Belt and the economic despair that has been prevailing in the region ever since of course, since the Reagan era, but has been accelerated in the 1990s and early 2010s, the economic decline in this region, the sort of deindustrialization in this region as jobs were sent over to China and other places. And we've talked about this before. The thing is that the economic policies that brought about this sort of woe to the Rust Belt were, yes, they were started by Reagan, but they were enforced by Clinton and continued by Bush and then continued by Obama. And Donald Trump was the first one willing to break free from that. So when Donald Trump was the first one to really look at the region and try and talk about what was the issue and say, we're going to bring the jobs back, we're going to reindustrialize the region, people listened. And the neoliberal Democratic establishment couldn't craft an effective argument against it because they were perpetuators of that policy. And now that Donald Trump is effectively the Republican Party, they've jettisoned a lot of those neoconservative economic values for a more, you can say, homegrown nationalist, industrialist, protectionist policy. Whatever kind of sequence of those words you want to throw together, he's definitely more focused in on protecting domestic American industry. And I do think that was definitely a key factor in getting him elected, was being the only one really to talk about, yes, I'm going to defend domestic industry. And of course, the Democrats actually, and one of the things is that under Joe Biden, the Democrats actually did move to a more trade protectionist stance. Joe Biden actually kept a lot of the tariffs on certain things that Donald Trump did. And he was actually smarter in terms of keeping the tariffs that worked and cutting the ones that were hurting people. Because here's the thing about tariffs. And one of the things that I have a lot of disagreement with a lot of new left-wing people and new socialist people is that I'm very much so a trade protectionist. I'm old enough to remember that when NAFTA was coming into effect, it was the socialists, it was the NDP, it was the pro-union people who were arguing against it. They were arguing that free trade would hurt and diminish the power of the working class, and they were absolutely right. And I've held on to that position so long that now I have seen people on the left to become more of the defenders of free trade and move away from economic protectionist policies. I've always had trouble understanding this, especially from a socialist perspective, because tariffs are something that literally every socialist and communist country has practiced inexhaustively throughout their histories. Trade protectionism has been a core part of socialist doctrine for a very, very long time. So I'm definitely a trade protectionist, and this is one of the very few common grounds that I can find myself standing on when I talk to people who are Trump supporters. But the issue is that the whole concept of tariffs and trade protection start to fall apart, because the way Trump has done this is because he's given this idea that tariffs are good always across the board, no matter what, because they will force more domestic industry. That's definitely not the case, because tariffs need to be managed on certain goods, because in order for tariffs to truly be effective and helpful and beneficial for people, they have to be well managed to make sure you are protecting the domestic industries that you want to protect, and you're not hurting them by extension, because sometimes some of these domestic industries rely on imported goods in order to manufacture what they need to manufacture where they are. So one thing, for example, that is going to be completely contradictory for Donald Trump, if he actually puts his 25% tariffs on Canada, is that Americans' oil is going to go up significantly. Because, I'm sorry, the oil is here in Alberta. You can't manifest it in the United States. It has to come from Canada to be refined. In Texas is where it usually gets refined. So the second you put a tariff, a blanket tariff like that, you're going to put a huge increase on the price of unrefined Canadian oil coming from Alberta, which Americans rely on a huge proportion of to refine their own petrol. So this is going to be the great contradiction for Donald Trump, is how is he going to balance all of these things that he said, all of these promises that he's made? How is he going to balance it all together? Because you can't bring in a policy like this, tariffs across the board, and also say, I'm going to run on reducing your prices and reducing your inflation. These are two inherently contradictory principles. Only one of these things will happen. Or what could happen is that you actually have an intelligent discussion around tariffs and figure out which ones are actually going to hurt our country. So speaking of Trump, we're at the White House now. We switched it up. Now we're here reporting live from the White House. And one of the things is I am actually pretty energized for Donald Trump's presidency. Not only does it give you a great foil to work with, especially from a left-wing commentator perspective, now, especially considering that he has the mandate, it's all on him. Anything that happens now is going to be 100% his fault, and he's going to have to own what actually happens now. You can't blame Joe Biden. You can't blame the woke Democrats or whatever other bullshit. He's got the trifecta in Congress. He's got himself as the president. He's got the House and the Senate. There's not really anything that the Democrats can do to stop him right now. Right now, the only thing that has been effective at stopping Republican policy is Republican infighting in and of itself. And from that perspective, it's great because every bad thing now that happens in the world can be directly attributed to Donald Trump. Obviously, I'm joking, but you understand what I mean, is that when you're the guy in charge, you got to own what happens, good or bad. And when it comes to the coalition that he has actually brought together, it's a fascinating coalition, but we're already seeing it start to fracture. And I think one of the best things that Donald Trump has been able to do from a political perspective for himself, that is become this sort of empty avatar for these vague principles like freedom and America and apple pie, and allow his followers to wish cast in a whole bunch of other stuff in between these principles. And now that Trump is in charge, he's made a whole ton of mutually contradictory promises to people. Within the Republican coalition itself, there is a lot of fault lines, which I think are going to start to emerge and have already started to emerge. If you have been following the recent infighting between Elon Musk and the H-1B1 visas, and a lot of more nationalist Republican MAGA types saying that we don't want any immigration, we want restricted immigration, no more immigration. And so we're having already a grinding against the principles of the more nationalist MAGA types and the more I'm just a generic billionaire and want to make as much money as I possibly can types. And this is one of the things that makes me hopeful that Trumpism can't really survive Trump. I don't know how anyone is going to be able to force all of these like disparate ideas together and get them to march in one direction for any cohesive period of time. If you guys remember back at the primary, we went through a list of people who support Donald Trump based on issues, and he was like the leader in every single issue. So it's like Republicans who believe that we should give more aid to Ukraine, Donald Trump's the leader. Republicans who believe that we should take away aid from Ukraine, Donald Trump's the leader. Republicans that believe that we should use preferred pronouns for trans people, Donald Trump is winning. Republicans who are against that, Donald Trump is winning. So basically, Donald Trump is winning between all of these camps because he has been able to, like I said, allow people to really fill in the blanks with him and believe whatever they want. But now this is coming to a head. And obviously, when you're in charge, you're going to have to pick a lane. You're going to have to do something. And no matter what you do, because these are contradictory positions, you're going to piss off part of this voting bloc of people who supported you. So the chances of this coalition surviving Donald Trump, I think, are very unlikely. We shall see. But again, the cracks are already forming, and I don't think that that's going to go away anytime soon. So when it comes to the Donald Trump term, it seems like a lot of those left-wing people who are super on the resistance side just burn themselves out. They just burn themselves out fighting the guy all the time for 4 years, and they don't want to do it again. I mean, I don't know what to say because you look so incredibly weak from that position, right? You just look like you just ran out of gas and gave up. But when it comes to, for myself, looking into the future for the Donald Trump presidency, what I am very much so focused on is what the guy's going to do. Here's the thing about Donald Trump is he's a yapper. Yap, 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 yap all the time, says all kinds of crap. And I am not really focused on the stuff so much that he says. I'm focused on the stuff that he does, right? And when it comes to this tariff stuff, I don't really believe at the end of the day he is going to put like a 25% tariff on Canada or Mexico. I think there are other places that he will definitely put tariffs on. But when it comes to us, I think basically what he's doing is try and strong arm some kind of concession. Maybe he'll get a thing here or there, and then he'll be like, yay, victory. And then he'll go on to the next issue du jour. So my point here being is that, yes, it is obviously worth spending some time considering what would happen if he put in a 25% tariff. Hasn't happened yet. And to be honest, I don't really think it's going to happen. Same with the mass deportation thing. I don't think that we're going to see the military called in, people going house to house and pulled out and deported. I think that what's going to happen is they will deport a few people who were maybe gang members or really, really bad guys or whatever. They'll deport a few people like that, declare victory, move on to the next thing. So the thing is, if I spend all my time just talking about all the crazy stuff he said, I'm just going to exhaust myself. I'm much more focused on the crazy stuff that he does. So yeah, even though we're going into what I think is going to be a very rocky 2025, I think 2024 was a rocky ride. I don't think it's going to get much better next year, but I am still hopeful for more long-term hope, right? I do think it's going to be a rough year, but long-term hope, I am definitely not anywhere close to throwing in the towel or giving up. So now, in terms of 2025, I want to move into the war in Ukraine and what I think is going to happen there, my predictions there. One of the things I was largely right about last year was what I thought was going to happen in Ukraine. Going to be mostly a stalemate. Any advances were going to be slow, hard-fought advances. The momentum would, by and large, stay with Russia, and they would be able to escape a mobilization this year because they've been getting a lot of volunteers and throwing tons of money at the problem to get soldiers into uniform and on the front lines. But that is a solution of diminishing returns. And we've already seen at the end of the year, we have confirmed reports of North Korean soldiers actually fighting and dying in Ukraine. It is wild, absolutely wild. This is the first time since the Korean War in which North Koreans have fought in any kind of land warfare or engagement. And unfortunately for them, their first engagements in Ukraine did not go well because they were not very properly trained in what a modern battlefield actually looks like. They weren't even told about the existence of drones. And one of the most wild statistics I've heard about this war is that for any kind of frontline soldier, any kind of assault soldier, there's approximately 4 to 5 drones deployed to support them. So for every one person, there's 5 drones. And you're going to send these guys into a war, not telling them anything about drones. And of course, it's going to be a disaster. The real question is, are they going to learn from this, retool, and actually become capable fighters? Certainly a question that is much more up in the air. But effectively what's happening is exactly what I thought would happen, is that you would put these people who have no experience in modern warfare into modern warfare, and they're going to perform exceptionally poorly. That's not to say, though, without proper training and conditioning, they could improve. And this is one of the things that is like, we talked about, I don't want to get too hearts of iron brained about this kind of stuff or anything like that. But when you put your army into actual warfare, in Hearts of Iron, you gain military experience. And with this military experience, it lets you change your divisions and build something that's more effective on the battlefield. So what I feel like is like you've got North Korea going in there. They've got no military experience. They've got very outdated templates. They've got very outdated divisions, and they're getting massacred. But over enough time, they can accrue that military experience and build something that's more effective. I always thought that that was a very interesting way of forcing the player to at least have certain divisions that they would have to start with or that they couldn't really change. And I also thought it was a very intelligent way of coming up with an idea of how armies actually gain experience, right? Because at the start, nobody knows, before war actually happens, nobody actually knows what the best quote unquote meta division is going to be. No one knows what the best way to fight is going to be. That's all going to have to be learned through actual on the ground warfare and experience. And the countries that are more experienced there are obviously going to understand the most effective ways to fight in the current type of warfare that we're experiencing. But moving on to my prediction for 2025, I do think that this will be a more decisive year in the Russo-Ukrainian war, not only because we had Zelensky come out and say that he is officially giving up reclaiming Crimea from a military perspective or with military force. This is obviously very depressing and sad, but at the same time, it is an exception of realism. Crimea may be beyond Ukraine's grasp, and if they're going to come to a deal, they're going to have to probably let that one go. I think it's probably a very bitter pill to swallow, but at this stage, that was one of the big things I think that we did a whole episode about it, in fact, about how either side's refusal to give up their claims on Crimea is one of the main reasons that a peace deal can't be forged. And if Ukraine is willing to move on that, then there is potentially something that can be forged. I also think that both sides are really coming to their limits in terms of their capability and their reserves, their manpower. I do not think that Russia will be able to, if it continues the war, there's no way I think that they're going to be able to escape a mobilization or some greater mobilization. I think it will have to happen. And in terms of Ukraine, they have to tighten their conscription laws. They have to lower the age for their conscription laws. I don't think that there's any choice at this point. And I know it's been popular, but again, this is a life or death type of scenario. And when it comes to the ongoing administration, I don't think that Trump is going to be able to end the war in Ukraine within 100 days. I am very interested to see what his plans are when it comes to Ukraine. This is definitely one of the things I'm watching to see what he's actually going to do rather than talk about all of the contradictory stuff that he has said. I recently watched, you guys should definitely go watch this video. If you guys watch the YouTuber Task and Purpose, he did a great documentary about embedding himself in the Ukrainian forces, and he talked to some Ukrainian politicians and whatnot. And he had this interview with, I think he was one of the chiefs of staff or assistant chiefs of staff for Zelensky. And he was talking about how when it comes to Donald Trump, he's actually optimistic. Donald Trump is going to have a good or better peace deal for Ukraine because he's the kind of guy that always wants to be seen as number one, right? He is not going to let a peace deal slide where he looks like he gave anything away to Putin or he looks weak or anything along those lines. I thought that was an interesting perspective and an interesting thing to say. And honestly, probably true, because I do think that when it comes to any kind of peace negotiation that Donald Trump is going to try and forge or be a part of, he is going to want to look like the head guy in that negotiations. He's not going to want to look like he gave anything away or was weak or cucked to Putin or whatever you want to say. He's going to want to be the guy. And that's one of the things I think that a lot of people use to manipulate and play with Donald Trump a little bit, but it's highly plausible. I think what he's saying is that I don't think that Trump is going to come in here and give Russia everything they want. I don't think that's what's on the table. But again, who knows really? We will know once he actually takes the office and is the guy cutting the deals and figuring out what's going to go on. We're actually going to see what his proposal for peace looks like. And before we go, I do just want to talk a little bit about one last hot spot here that we haven't really spoken about, and that is Taiwan. I remember we made a prediction last year because they had an important election at the beginning of 2024 where they effectively affirmed a anti-Chinese president and an anti-Chinese stance moving into the future. So one of the things that people are looking at is China going to make a play for Taiwan? This year, I'm going to say no. I don't think it's going to happen this year. I think the window is open now. The window's open now for them to do something, and it's going to be closing rapidly. I don't think that, though, this is the year where they end up making a move. I'm sure that they were watching the American election closely, And because this time there wasn't any kind of instability or anything like that, I think that they are going to want to see the kind of stance that Donald Trump will take and what diplomacy is now going to look like between America and the People's Republic of China. So I think this year they're probably going to not make a move and instead rather continue to gather information and continue to see where exactly things are going to settle into for the next 4 years of foreign policy under Donald Trump. So for 2025, I think Taiwan will be safe. I think that they will be okay. The place where I am much more worried about some type of war breaking out is between Iran and Israel. We talked a little bit about the fall of Assad, now replaced with a coalition of former jihadists who are now acting like a merry troop of nationalist nation builders or whatever you want to say. Very interesting evolution on that front. But regardless, the government, quote unquote, whatever you want to say, holds the power in Damascus now, is generally perceived to be pretty pro-Turkey, which is a flip effectively because the Assad regime was very cozy with Iran, and Iran used Syria as a corridor to supply Hezbollah in Lebanon and basically harass Israel. And now that corridor is shut down. In fact, Israel has taken over and created a larger buffer zone between them and their original holdings in the Golan Heights. And this is mainly because there's strategic high ground in the region. They want to take it. And effectively, it will cut off any type of assistance that Iran can give to Hezbollah in Lebanon. So things are looking pretty good. 2024 was not a good year for Iran. They're looking rough. And when it comes to Syria now, especially that the government is a question mark, I think that they are definitely going to want to play nice with Israel. They're beholden to Turkey effectively. So it's going to be interesting to see where the cards fall there. With that being said, Israel is looking very empowered now. And I think it's very plausible that some sort of saber rattling between Israel and Iran escalates to a heated conflict, especially with Donald Trump now winning the presidency. He and Netanyahu are very, very close. And I feel like Netanyahu has just been begging. He's just been begging for a war with Iran for decades now. And he might finally get it. He might finally get it because things are looking good for them, right? Because Israel on the power scale is looking pretty ascendant in comparison to a lot of its neighbors. And you could definitely see its time to strike is now. All right. And with that, I think we're going to wrap things up with a little bit of talk about what's going to happen on the show. I know it's been a rough December, and I'm going to make up for it. This is going to be the year of the Comrade. I feel like there are going to be massive changes in my life. And that's because my schedule for the new year is going to be radically changed from what it was before. There are big changes happening in my life personally, and I'm not ready to talk about them yet, but very soon they shall be revealed. And I genuinely can't wait to talk about them. It's stuff I've been wanting to talk about for years. But anyway, there are big changes happening in my life, and many of them are geared towards giving myself more time to work on things like the YouTube channel and a lot of other personal projects that I have. I'm pretty excited about the new year, guys, and I hope you guys had a wonderful celebration with your family. And until next time, this is the Comrade, wishing you guys a happy new year, and I'll see you next time.